Hello. We're going to work on the Monogram project. This is the first of the raster graphics um, projects that we'll work on. And the raster projects, obviously, anything that is pixel based and anything that's pretty much pixel based, we'll be using Photoshop for. Um, to start out, we're going to open up Schoology. Now, for those of you who've already had this in class, you can kind of skip ahead and move on to the next section, if you will. Otherwise, pay attention. We're going to show you how you're going to download what you're looking for to download, and then how to get it onto your desktop, because ultimately we want it on the desktop. I prefer you working off of the desktop with your files and stuff so that you can have them readily available to you. So we're going to go to Schoology first. So navigate to Schoology, and then navigate to our class. Our class is obviously this one, Intro to Digital Media, and it should look, like this. You're going to see that after you're inside the digital media course, you'll see a number of different colored folders. And here you should find Unit 3 Raster Graphics. Once you find that, you can click on there. And inside here, for right now, you should only see the Monogram folder. And when you click on the Monogram folder, you'll see a couple different things inside here. One of which you should see is this zip file. One monogram student.zip. The zip it's a compressed file. We're going to want to unzip this. Now, again, as I usually say, to go to Schoology, I'd usually tell you that it is preferred if you're using Safari. So if you're using Safari and you click on a zip, it will actually, when it goes to the download folder, it will actually automatically unzip itself. Now, if you're using Chrome, Chrome will not be as nice or won't play as nice. You'll have to unzip it, from there. So again, I prefer if you're using Schoology. I mean, not Schoology, but I prefer you using Safari. So if you click on this monogram student.zip, you'll have to click on it one more time. It will download to your downloads. Now, if you don't have downloads down here, if you do, you should be able to find it in here and then click and drag this over to your desktop. If not, you'll go into Finder, and you'll find where it says Downloads over here. You'll click on Downloads, and then inside here you should be able to find the folder One Monogram Student. Now, again, if you had used Chrome, this will be a white folder with a zipper on it. If I do this, compress one, you'll see that it would look like this. So, in other words, you could either have this file where it says Monogram Student, blue folder, and you can drag this over and drag this onto your desktop like so. If you happen to have used Chrome and you get this file, drag that one over to your desktop. Now, then you can simply close out of this window, and also you can actually close Schoology for now. We're done with Schoology. And last thing we'll do before we move on to opening the file or going into the file is, if you have the zip file, the way that you're going to extract it is you would double click it and it will open, and then you will get a little blue folder, and that's what we want. You can then take this folder, the Monogram 1 zip, and drag that down to your trash and get rid of it later on. So then either way, you have either this folder or that folder. It should be labeled One Monogram Student. Now this one, put a 2 after it just because I have 2 of them. So for right now, I'm going to get rid of this one, but that's how you would unzip it if you were to actually use the Chrome version. Now, if you use the Safari, it already does it for you, and it makes life just a little bit easier. Moving on. Okay. With your folder here, what we're going to do is we're going to explore this, and we're going to double click on it, and you're going to open it. Inside here, you're going to see 4 folders. For right now, the only thing that we're going to worry about is this template folder. So we're going to double click on that folder to open it. Now, I don't want you doing anything with this file just yet. I want you to kind of listen to what I'm going to say, and then we'll kind of go from there. We're going to copy this file, and we're going to do that by duplicating it. And we're going to need to right-click on top of this icon. So if you hover over top of the icon, you right-click on it, and then you can choose from this menu, Duplicate. So you're going to choose Duplicate, click on that. Now you get this copy. I want you to move it over, and now what we'll do is we'll rename this. So anywhere on top of these blue lettering, you can right-click again, and essentially, or around the icon, you can right-click, and you're going to choose Rename. And we're going to rename this our last name, and then we're going to type in Mono, M-O-N-O, for Monogram. Then you can click you can either hit Enter, Return, or click anywhere outside in the white space, and you should then have the Dusco mono.psd. Okay, and the PSD is proprietary to Photoshop. That is a Photoshop file or a Photoshop document, as it is. So just so you know that anything that's .psd will only be able to be opened by a program that can open up PSD, hence Photoshop. So what you can do then, once we have this, you can essentially double click on the Monogram, this folder, this file right here, and it'll open up Photoshop. And that should take you to here. So this next step, we're going to talk about a little bit about the interface of Photoshop itself. So if you've already done this in class as well, then you can kind of skip ahead again a little bit more till we get to putting in the text and then editing it from there. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at a couple of things. One thing I want to point out is this navigator. So over here you see where we had put these tabs up here. The navigator is the one that I think you'll use a lot. It allows us to zoom in and zoom out of this image. Now with the white image here, it's not helpful to see when you zoom in. It doesn't make sense, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in my desktop, and I'm going to right-click and open up this one file here into Photoshop so you can see an image. Again, if I zoom out, I'm zooming out. If I zoom in, then you can see what's happening here is I'm actually zooming in, and there I get down to the actual pixels themselves. So this is very handy, so if you need to zoom in. But what's even handier with it is if you look over here at this, you get this little red box here. This little red box, you can actually click and drag this around the image. So if I wanted to, say I wanted to edit out this truck out of this image, I could be able to now use this to sort of navigate my way around. Or if I wanted to edit or modify any of this to, let's say, get rid of some of these, the rust stains that are coming down off of the letters, or say I wanted to eliminate this because it's just something I wanted to eliminate out of the picture, I can use this nice little red box with the handle, with the hand, and move it around to adjust or to really get in tight to the image to make some edits or changes that I feel that I would need to do. But again, you should note that Command minus and Command plus still do work, but this navigation tab here will really come in handy because in Adobe Illustrator, we were able to come down to this lower right-hand corner and change your, change your size from down here. It doesn't work the same in Photoshop. So that's why generally I would almost always use Command plus, but when I want to get and move around inside the picture and zoom in and move around the picture, I really like this navigator feature a lot. All right, so moving on, I'm going to talk about the history tab that's right here. So right here where you see history, that's what we're going to talk about next. For now, I'm going to get rid of this Pine Grove picture here, and I'm going to move back to this image. And this is something I did in class with some of the other students where I'm going to grab the paintbrush tool. So you can see all the tools that go down the side here. The paintbrush tool is the one that looks like a paintbrush, and if you want to do this with me, you can. I'm going to click and draw a line. I'm going to do that 3 more times. So I should have 4 lines all together. What I want you to notice is if I hit Command Z, it does the undo function. Now, again, that's what was in all the other programs. It does it. But if I hit it one more time, it redoes. So undo, redo, and I'm only hitting Command Z. Problem is, Photoshop does it so you can't undo too many things at one time. So you gotta have a little, it kind of, it's a fail-safe in it. Now, you could do Option Command Z and undo multiple steps again, but sometimes that becomes a little bit cumbersome as far as the key command because it's all real tight on the keyboard there. So often what I will do is I actually will use the history. The history, I can go back, I can go forward, as long as they don't make any changes. So I can go forward, I can go back to here, I can go back to right when I started this, or when I opened this program, this file, up here where it says open. So I can go all the way back to right when I opened the file. But you can see that if I go back, let's say go back to the first step, and then I take my paintbrush tool again, and I draw in 3 new lines, but 3 lines that close up the box. Now you can notice that if I go back, I can't, the other vertical lines, or horizontal lines rather, I can't get them back because I redid history. So you can undo, but as soon as you redo something, you don't get those lines back that you just redid. Now, it makes more sense when you're working in a project. So we'll kind of leave that at that, but I would suggest that if you're undoing things, I would suggest that your best bet is kind of sticking with the history tool over here, this panel over here, to kind of use and do that with. So that's pretty much the history tool here, but it's going to be coming very handy for you. The layers panel, that's the next thing that I will show you right now. And this works similar to the other program that we use with Adobe Illustrator. You have that same little icon with the paper with the dog-eared corner here. If you wanted to add a layer, you would click here. I could click and add another layer and then another layer, depending on what I am, kind of working on here. And you can see up here, I get that in the history as well. New layer, new layer, new layer. So you can get various different things. Again, sort of to hint back here at this layer, the history, it also gives you a visual representation, like words, new layer, new layer. So if I came back over here, did my paintbrush, I came over here and I did, let's see, I'll click on layer 2 and I'll add a fill color, and maybe I'll put a fill color of red in. So I've got this here. I can then see exactly what I did and where it was. So if I wanted to go back and say, oh, well, I didn't want to do that new layer, I can go back, but then you realize it's going to undo various things. But you can go and pick and choose and find what you did and where you did it through the history tool as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back to open up here and leave it at just at layer 0 at the moment. Over here on the left-hand side, you have the various tools. Now, this arrow tool is similar to the black arrow tool we used in Adobe Illustrator. This will be your kind of your go-to move tool. It is called the move tool. You'll be able to, if you, let's say I drew this object. Now, I did draw this object on a white background, so if I use this move tool, it's actually going to move everything that's part of this layer. That's something to realize as well, because in Illustrator, if I drew something and then I tried to move it, all the little things were separate entities. In Photoshop, whatever you put on one layer becomes all part of that layer. So over here, I have layer 0. If I want to add a new layer and then do the same thing where I drew this, this box, now I use the move tool. This box is only just down here on layer 1. So if I move this, I'm moving all of layer 1. And anything that I had added to layer 1 would be moving. Now I moved this white layer because I clicked on the white area. So it's very easy to sort of move some things that you may not want to. So just be careful what you're moving. And then again, if you wanted to lock something down because you don't want to accidentally move it like I just did, you could select the layer, and the way when you select the layer, it turns this lighter gray color. You can come up here and click on this lock. This lock then locks this down. So if I come over here with my move tool, I can click all I want to on this layer and it won't move that white box. But if I come up here and click on the red box, it now switches my selection and I can move that. And even if I were to miss the red box like I did earlier, it's not going to let me accidentally do anything at all to that white layer, so I won't mess it up. So this lock can come in very handy. Now you can just click on the lock to unlock it again if you so want to. Now I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to click back up here where it says open. Again, you can see that, you can see my history here and, use it from there. The other thing I want to point out that's going to be very important through all of your projects is going to be the color. In Illustrator, we had 2 colors. The first color was your fill color, and the second color was your stroke color or the outline color. Here, if I hover over top of this, it's going to say set foreground color. I hover over the other one, that's going to say set background color. These are the 2 colors, and they work a little bit differently in the sense that it just depends on which color you're painting with or you're drawing with or whatever. So if I have the red, if I click on the red, it allows me to click and change the color like it did before. Click on the white and I can change that color like I did before. So I'm going to choose a blue. So I got that. So now I've got this red and the blue. Well, if I take my paintbrush tool, I have the red color. Well, I can simply use this double-headed arrow here, and I click on that. I switch the 2 colors. Well, now what's in the foreground is what I'm painting with. I can switch it back, and I can kind of do that, and then I can kind of switch it one more time, and then just kind of do that. So I've got this, I got this switching back and forth with colors. What can be interesting is it will use these colors for like some of the filter options will use these 2 colors. So whether you have it set to black and white or you have it set to whatever colors are down here, be mindful that that's what will reflect in some other features within the program. So that's how you set your colors. Now, if you want to reset the colors back to black and white, you simply can just click on this little image right here, this little image of the black and the white boxes. Click on that. They're back to the way they were before. Okay? So that's how you can try to change your colors up again. So I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to click on open, and that kind of takes care of just that introduction to Photoshop and where things might be located that will come in very handy multiple times throughout the course of a project. Your colors, your history, your layers, and obviously knowing where your tools are. That's going to be very important. Well, this concludes this part of this lesson, and I had done this also with several of the classes so far. If you've gotten to this point, then great. You're going to move on to the next part where you put in the letters. So that's where we're headed next. Okay, so we're gonna work on putting our letters in. We're gonna do a monogram. A monogram typically is 3 letters, your initials. Your last initial is the largest of all of them, and then your first letter of your initial goes here, and the first letter of your middle initial goes here. So, and we'll take a look at that now. So rather than use my initials, I'm just going to use PGA. Let's say those were my initials, okay, PGA, all right? And we're going to start out with our last initial. So if my initials were PGA, I'm going to start out with the last initial, and that's going to be the A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and click on the type tool, so this T, okay? Now, I'm going to point out a couple of things, and I need to make a little change just so it looks similar to what yours is probably looking like right now. So if I click on the text tool, you'll see I get this little I-beam up. If I click inside the, well, before I click, I'm just going to come up here and show you. Again, when you choose different tools, this toolbar up here changes accordingly. So I'm going to click again. I'm going to make sure that I'm on this text tool. And you should see up here, you see the T, which reflects which tool you're on, which is the text tool. And you see Myriad Pro. That should be the font currently on your screen as well. Now, the next thing you see is regular because it's not bolded or italicized or anything. It's regular. Right here, it probably says on yours, it probably says 12. Okay, it probably says 12. And over here, the justification is probably set to less justified. What I want you to do is first, if you see where it says 12 here, if you double click inside where to highlight the 12, okay, you're going to type in 300 here. You type in 300 and then you can hit enter and then come over here and we want this center justified. We don't need it right or left justified. We want it to show up just centered so it makes our lives a little bit easier for this project. I do want to point out one other thing. You got this little box right here, and this little box is your color, your font color. The font color can be changed here after the fact, or it should be when you first bring up the tool, should be the reflection of this color here, which would be your foreground color. So if your foreground color is black, this should be black to start, unless you change it. If you change it, it doesn't change this color, mind you, but it will change the color of the font that you currently have. So if I have center justified 300 and it says Myriad Pro, I'm going to click somewhere down here in the middle of this screen. So you can see you get a very large cursor. And this very large cursor is obviously going to be your font. We set it to 300, so it ought to be large. And I'm going to put my last initial. You can put your last initial here. I'm again using PGA, so I'm just going to put the A here as my last initial. So I have that set to here. So I have my A here and I'm done with this layer. So what's going to happen is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to choose this move tool, the arrow tool, the one with the 4 points on it. I'm going to click on it. What you should see then is it commits this layer. So it's a text layer and you can see that it reflects whatever text you typed in there. So this is A. So now I could actually click on this layer with the move tool and I can move this around and say I want to center it. Now if I move this around, I get all these little pinkish purplish lines that show up. Well, they help me center it. So right now I have it centered on the horizon, but now I can center it vertically and you can see I get a perfect sort of crosshairs here. So I know that it is centered and I can let go. Well, now I want to put in my other two initials. So I'm going to put my first initial. My first initial is going to go on this left-hand side. So on this left-hand side, I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to grab my text tool. And I'm going to click somewhere out here in this area between this side and the A. So I want to make sure that I still have this box around it. If you notice, if I get too close to this A, that box goes away. I want to keep that box around it so I don't want to, mess up my A. So I click over here one time and I get this large, cursor again. But this time I want to change this to be smaller. So I'm going to come up here to my font size where it says 300 point. I'm going to double click in there and change it to 200 point. So 200 and hit enter. Okay, so now it's a little bit smaller than what this A is. And I'm going to type in my first initial, which would be a capital P, because I was using PGA. So I'm going to hit Shift P, and I've got my P, and I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to click on this, 4-point arrow or the Move tool, and I'm going to be able to move it. Now, again, if you sort of align this, you should be able to find out eventually where is the center. There's center. I can then move it and just sort of eyeball it as where I would like it next to this A. So I can kind of eyeball it. That looks pretty good. Now I want to make my next letter, and that's going to be the G. Well, for the G, I'm going to either, I could simply just go over here, grab the text tool, come over here, and again, make sure my I-beam has a box around it. I just click, and I type in G, and I can click on the arrow tool again, and I can move it over here sort of into place. And you can see the purple lines kind of help you line it up a little bit, and we can kind of go from there. Now, there's another way I could have done the G, and this is a trick that we sort of learned when we were doing the cardinal head in Adobe Illustrator. So what I'm going to do is I am going to delete this layer. And a way you can delete the layer is make sure, again, it's selected. It's got this lighter gray color. You come down here to the bottom where you see the trash can. Click on the trash can. Delete layer G. Yep. Click it, and it's gone. What I could have done was with the arrow tool selected, with the Move tool, I could hit Option and press and hold Option. And you can see I've got a double-headed arrow. I could click and drag it over, just like we did in the cardinal, where we clicked and dragged various different objects. I can click and drag and then let go over here. I've got my P, but now I want to change that text, because I don't want a P, I want a G. So this is where, when I told you before with the text tool, I'm going to go over here and grab the text tool. And you see I have this box around my cursor here. But when I get closer to the P, it goes away. Well, that allows me to know that I'm in another text box. So right here, I could create a new text box, or if I get close enough to an old text box, I could click and drag, and I select the letter. And now I can change that letter to a G. So I've got P, G, A. All right, so I've got my letters here. Now, I can take my arrow tool and sort of I want to do that. I want to take this arrow tool and I want to nudge this around just to make sure that I've got everything sort of the way I want it for now. We can obviously make changes and arrangements later on, and I'll show you kind of how to do that later. So for now, I think this is another spot in which I got a lot of different classes to this point where you've got PGA, or you've got your initials, you've got your monogram down. However, your monogram is very plain Jane and very dull at the moment, and we're going to spice it up just a little bit by modifying how it looks. So if you've gotten to this point, and this is where we're going to start the next step. So if you've gotten to this point and this is where you are, this is where you're going to want to start. Okay, so we're starting here with PGA. We've put our letters in. They're all the same size. We've kind of arranged them for now how we like them, and we can go on from there. So here's our A, and I like to start with the A. I like to start with the largest one and style it from there and kind of go, from there. So what I want to make sure before I do anything else is I want to make sure my layer A is the one that is selected. So I've got A selected here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on top of this layer. When I right click on the layer, I get this big expansive menu that I can do various different things. Well, for right now, what I want to do is I want to change its blending options. So if I go up to the very top, there's a word called blending options. And I'm going to click on that. That's going to open up a window, and it's going to call layer styles. So layer styles is how we're going to change and modify how this letter A will look. Okay. Now, I'm not going to show you all of them currently at the moment, but I am going to show you 4 of them. So kind of get yourself started. Later, when I let you go and you can do your own project and style this on your own, then you can, kind of explore what some of these will do and go from there. Now, I want to point out something. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to change the color overlay. I'm going to lay another color over top of this letter. So instead of changing the font color through the, using the other fill colors here, or the foreground colors, I'm going to use an overlay to do it. So if I click on overlay, now there's 2 things I can do. Well, one, I could click right here, and if I click on that box, you notice my A changed this gray color, right? Well, I don't really want that gray color necessarily, and I want to change it. Well, if you notice, I've got this, but this didn't change. If I turn it on, turn it off, this over here, this menu in the center hasn't changed. I need this to change my settings. So instead of just clicking on that little box, you need to click on the words right here where it says color overlay. So I click on the words, and now I get this menu where it says color overlay, and I get these couple of different options. Here you're going to see first, you see blend mode says normal. For right now, we'll talk about blend mode later on in a couple of other projects we do, but for right now, leave it set to normal. I wouldn't change it because it doesn't really play nice if you don't know what it's going to do otherwise. So what I would say is, here's my gray color, and I can adjust or slide it around by clicking on that color box. Opens up the color picker, and I can kind of, play around with this gray color and go from there to set what kind of gray I might want. Again, if you want a true gray, you want to stay as close to this edge. Now, since Pine Grove's colors are, maroon and gray, or maroon and silver, however you want to look at it, we're going to kind of go from there. So I'm going to now click on up here where it says OK. So I've got that color. Well, I like to, it looks rather flat, so I want to give it a little bit of shape. So I'm going to come up here where it says bevel and emboss, and I can change things. Now, generally, most of the time, when you start out with some of these, it's probably not necessarily going to look like this. But so I'm going to reset some of these numbers here, and I'm going to go up to the top and start up here and work my way down. I do want inner bevel, so I'm going to leave inner bevel here. The next one where it says technique, it says smooth. And if I click on the drop down, I get hard chisel or chisel soft. I want chisel hard because I want it sort of a hard edge to it. And here's the depth. I can change this depth, but notice if I change the depth now, nothing's happening. Well, I want to change my size a little bit. You can see I can change my size, and you can see what's happening over here. Now, you can see how this letter is sort of changing shape, and it's actually becoming a little more 3D, if you will. If I change it all the way out, I can get it up to here where it's like 59 and make it have a really sharp edge and make it look really, like it's coming towards me. It has some dimension to it. Now I can also change, here's where I can change the depth and make this depth, make it look really, like there's a lot of deep color to it, and kind of go from there. So you can change that. Now I can also soften this if I wanted to and make it look a little more bubbly than I do like a hard chisel with that hard edge. But for right now, I'm going to leave it as the hard edge. I don't really want to soften it too much for my likes. Now you can see that over here you have this next box here where it's shading. You can move this around to sort of change how the shading kind of goes. I typically like to stay with the default, which is 120, and leave it at that, and I kind of use that. I also like to always make sure that I have this check mark in here. It says use global light. That way, no matter what I change, it's always going to use this light reference as the reference for my lighting. Anything else down here, below here, I'm not going to worry about changing right now. I'm going to leave that kind of alone. The next thing I might do is there's stroke. The stroke, again, you can see if I change the size, it gives us that outline look. That might be something you want, might be something you don't want, but for right now, I'm going to turn it off. So I'm going to make sure that check mark is turned off. It's not on there because I really don't want the stroke right now. Inner shadow, if I added this inner shadow, you can see that it gives this a little bit of a dark edge to it. It might be something that I would like You can change the opacity up a little bit if you want to just give it a hint of that there's, something sort of maybe either blocking it or giving it that idea that there is still some extra shape to it. And kind of go from there. You can change these distances out a little bit if you wanted to, or change how this how it looks. But again, these are some of the things that you can kind of mess with at a later time when I let you do it on your own, but just kind of showing you things. The last thing I want to show you in this list of layer styles is the very bottom one, the drop shadow. The drop shadow really gives it this idea that it can make it look like it's coming off the page. So I can choose my distance to kind of give it how far do I want it standing off the page. The opacity, again, how dark or how light. Maybe I really want it light or dark. And this is going to be one of those personal preference things, and how far do you want it to spread as far as how much do you want it to bleed out from that typical shape there. And then last, the size of the blur, the size of the fuzz, I guess, if you will. How much do you want? Well, I think I'm going to kind of leave it there. I've got 10, 14, and 10 in there. My opacity is set at 64. I don't really want it too, if I wanted it too hard, it might look like it's still a little rather close. I might stick with like 80 up here as a good happy medium, if you will, for this. So it looks like I've got some dimension, I've got some shape, I've got some height to it off of the page. And for now, I'm going to click on OK. So again, like I said, you can style your letters how you want, but for this example, I'm going to show you how I'm going to style this letter A. And you can be following along and doing this, and that's great. And then you can go back and then modify these later on. So what I want you to do here is you're going to notice that you have your effects, and you have all these different little settings down here. And these are, you can turn them off, to turn them back on to see what they, how they affect this overall project, and go from there. But now I want these other two letters to have that same effect. So how am I going to do that? Pretty darn easy, actually. I'm going to go up here to Layer at the very top of the screen. I'm going to go up here to Layer and click on Layer, and I go down where it says Layer Style. Okay, and I'm going to copy the layer style from Layer A. Again, what I would like to just to point out, make sure you have that Layer A selected. It's got this lighter gray color to it. And again, Layer Style, and come down here where it says Copy Layer Style. So click on Copy Layer Style. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my P layer. So that's the next layer. So this layer that has the P on it. I am going to go up to Layer, go down to Layer Style, and click on Paste Layer Style, and you'll see that my P looks similar to my A. Now there might be some differences somewhat to the way the shape looks, and it has to do with also the size of the letter, and how it reflects the light. It may look a little bit different than your original letter, but again, you could always go in and tweak some of these just to kind of fine tune it. Well, with my P, I want to make sure that my P and my G are a different color. Now you can have them all the same color, it doesn't necessarily matter, but for right now I might want to have the two colors of the school, so maroon and silver. So I might want to go back into my P and change something. And you can always go back into your effects. Once you're done with your effects, they're not set in stone. You can always change them. The easiest way to do that is look at the word where it says effects here and double click on it. When you double click on it, you get the blending layer open, and you can see that you have these check marks in here. Those are all the settings. So I'm going to go to my color overlay, and I'm going to come up here to that gray, and I'm going to actually go in and choose a maroon color. And you can see that in real time, it's happening on your page. You can see how it is changing. So you can kind of see and adjust to see, oh, well, maybe I don't like that color. Maybe it should be a different whatever. But again, it's going to be personal preference on what you like. I'm just going to stick with this color, make it simple on myself, and click on OK. And then I'm going to click on OK again. Well, now I've got this as my red, and I've got this as my silver or gray. Well, I want my G to be the same as my P. Well, very easily. We can do it just like we did the last time. make sure the P is selected, layer P is selected, go up here to layer, go to layer style, and we're going to copy this layer style, that because we changed it to the red or the maroon. So click on that. I'm going to then go to the G layer, and G is selected. I'm going to go up here to where it says layer, go to layer style, down from layer style, and click on paste layer style. Now I've got my PGA right here, and that's done. So I got that all set up. So I've got my colors set up. Great. Now I might want to do something with my background. White is okay if that's what you're happy with, but you might want to change it up to make it look a little something different or make it be more what you want. So one way we can do that is we can go to our layers and we can find our layer 0. Now I want you to notice something. You know how you see how all this stuff with the effects is still showing, and it kind of is sort of cumbersome to look through to find layer 0. Well, easy way to fix that is we can collapse these layers so that it's simpler to look at. What we can simply do is over here where the FX is, there's this arrow. If you click on that arrow, you can then collapse these to make this look a little bit nicer and easier to manage. If you ever need to go back to them, you click on the arrow again, they appear again. So we're going to go down to layer 0. I'm going to click on layer 0 here. And this is again where I can go up to blending options if I wanted to. And I can go inside here and change my color overlay. So if I want to change my color overlay, I can click on that and change it to whatever color maybe I wanted to. Maybe I want that, want a darker maroon so that everything sort of stands out. That looks actually kind of cool. Maybe I want it to be a little bit lighter than that. I can do it that way as well. And just click on OK, and it'll be that color. Now, I could also choose for gradient overlay. If I want gradient overlay, I click on gradient overlay. And then inside here, where you see the word gradient, if you click that drop down, you get different choices for gradients for your background. Now, I did what I wanted to do there a little bit too soon there, but here's my gradient. But let's just say I like a gradient, but maybe I really don't like one of these gradients. I can double click on that gradient and open this panel up. So I could essentially choose these colors to be a little bit different, and maybe I want them to be sort of this whole silver and gray kind of, gray and maroon color rather. And then I now have that. So I've got a maroon and gray reflective of the colors that are already there. I can choose this to be linear. There's a drop down here, a linear or radial or angled or reflective. I could choose this to be diamond. But let's just say the diamond, I can, again, you can scale this a little bit, I think, right there. If you wanted to, or what you could do is I could, maybe I liked the reflected, which gives you this more of this stripe in the middle, and it's got this, the gray or silver at the edges. Well, I can scale this up to make it broader. Maybe I like that. Well, maybe I'd rather have it reversed. I can reverse it. And I can scale it back down the other way. So I could have it look like that. And I could do that. I can also turn gradient overlay off and put pattern overlay. And in pattern overlay, when I click in here, I get this drop down where I got a couple different things I could choose from. Maybe I really like this, this texture right here. It's more like a burlap or a, say a canvasy kind of look, or I've got this look. If I stick with this canvas look, I can leave it as that, and then I can also scale that down or scale that up depending on what I want to do as far as the texture is concerned, if I want that. And I could also choose the opacity. I could dull this down a little bit by changing my opacity. Or I could actually even put, if Yeah, I can just leave it like that. If I wanted to sort of change some of these colors, I could actually go ahead and possibly do some changes. But for right now, you can probably just stick with one of the simplest, just by choosing these for right now. So I've got gradient overlay, color overlay, pattern overlay, and I guess I kind of like this. I'm going to choose this to 80%. I've got this. It kind of looks like it's on, kind of on some sort of interesting background. Maybe even if I looked in here, there might be one that's more of a sandstone or something, and I can kind of adjust that a little bit. Maybe that even looks okay, like it's sitting on like a piece of marble or something. I'm going to click on OK and leave it like that. But you can kind of see how this can play out with using these different effects. And again, this is just a project to get you started in Photoshop and understanding things. But the other thing I want to show you is alignment, and then that'll be it, and I'll let you do your own project from here. So you see PGA, it may not look centered to you or whatever, and you might want to adjust it. What you can do is, if I go in here and I see where the G is, I click on the G, and I'm going to hold down Command on the keyboard. So if I hold down Command and I click on the G, the P, and the A, you should notice that when you have the arrow selected, you get these little boxes up here at the top. So these little boxes are your alignment, but you have to have multiple layers selected for the alignment to work, because otherwise they're aligning. You can't align it against something if you don't have something to align it to. So we're going to, if I choose this one, it's going to align it on the horizon so that everything is, sort of centered going left to right. And if I click that, now I have them centered because I have them all selected. Now, if I want to assure that they're all sort of aligned up next to each other, I can click on this one, which is centered on the align, and that kind of aligns that A and makes that look like this is spaced better. Now, again, it doesn't say that you have to keep it that way, because you notice, like for me, I'm looking at this, I've got a bigger gap over here than I do against the G. This edge and this edge looks different to me. So what I might say is, I could just click on the A. I did that, but I don't really like what it did. I click on this A layer, and I can use these arrow keys, the arrow keys on your keyboard, and actually just nudge it back over. And when I kind of like it, I'll leave it there. And I'm done. I like it. It's good. I've got some effects that I want, and I'm happy with it. This is what I'm happy to turn in. And we can kind of go from there. Now, for right now, what I'm going to let you do is I'm going to let you work on your project from here. If you want to rewind the video or go back and look at what I did again, you can do that. Otherwise, for right now, I'm going to let you play for all intents and purposes with your letters and give you some time to adjust them. So that's the end of this video.